everybody, and welcome back to the Beef Up Front podcast here on Pick Swap Media. Introducing a new preseason little series today that will be running over the next few weeks as we lead up to, I believe it's November 6th, when college basketball tips off again. Me and Sean here are going to be doing some season previews on ACC and Big East today. We'll be doing Big 10, Big 12, Pac-12, SEC, all the major conferences, and then we're going to throw in like a best of the rest pod as well. So excited to hit the ground running with this, get this going over the next few weeks, get the college basketball talk flowing. But welcome back to the show, Sean. Thanks for joining us, and how are we?
Yeah, I'm excited to talk some college hoops. I spend most of my time doing NBA stuff and covering that, writing about that, but there is something about college basketball that always kind of gets me going in those late night hoop sessions and everything about it. So tournament's my favorite time of year to get the build up. I'm excited to get deeper into it this year and fully in, so I'm ready to go.
Yeah, excited to do this series. I think it should be some fun stuff. Get a lot of kind of just the basic knowledge of what you need to know headed into the season. So, just to give you a preview of kind of the episode, we're going to be going through the ACC and the Big East today. We're going to be breaking down our top three teams from each of those conferences, sleeper team, and then as well as a team we have overrated, and then giving you our all conference first team as well as our player of the year. So, we'll be doing that. We're going to start it off with the ACC. So, we'll go from 3-1. Who do you think is going to be the third best team in the ACC this year?
My third best team in the ACC this year, I have Miami. I'm pretty high on Miami this year overall. Went 26-11 last year. Uh, Isaiah Wong and Jordan Miller coming back, returning the team. Isaiah Wong, Philly guy, awesome story, awesome player. Improved a ton in the tournament last year. I thought they added through the transfer pool. I don't mean to jump on everything you're probably gonna say too, but added through the transfer pool. Nigel Pack from Kansas State, who's first team All Big 12 last year, as well as Norchid Omir, who from Arkansas State. The 30th ranked out of the transfer portal there. So 24th ranked recruiting class, two impressive players off the transfer portal. I'm pretty excited about what Miami's building. I do think Isaiah Wong's like a long-term NBA guy and going to improve again this year. So I'm excited to see what they put together.
Yeah, I'm big fan of Miami this year as well. Lost some key pieces, but do have some key pieces coming back. I'll touch on them in a little. My third place team, I have UVA, a rare miss for the tournament for them last year. I think this is a big time bounce back year for the program. I think Tony Bennett is just too good of a coach to have back to back seasons without going to the tournament. They do return all five starters, have another year in the system, and as we know, watching Virginia basketball, one of the tougher systems, just the way that they defend, play that slow kind of like precision pace. Each and every possession for them matters. So I think, the more practice and the more game reps you have running that system, the better it is. And with all five starters back, a very experienced group. And they have something to prove this year. I think that makes them a dangerous team. I know there are more talented players out there in the country, but Kihei Clark might be the most like rock solid point guard in the country. Just does everything and is the ultimate coach on the floor for Tony Bennett. They do need to shoot the ball better as a team, though. That's the biggest thing for them. Only shot 32% from deep last year. They got to get those numbers up if they want to compete in the ACC at a high level again. And then Jaden Gardner, he's back, a former transfer from East Carolina, had a nice first season with Virginia. I think he could really explode and be a first-team all-league type guy this year. He's a double-double threat. Bounce-back season, I think, though, Lumen from UVA, after going 21-14 last year, missing the tournament, I think they'll be back this year and get a nice high seed in that 4 or 5 range probably.
Yeah, nice. To move on to my number two, I have Duke coming in at number two. I know we're going to disagree a little bit on this one, which I like. Obviously, the new era of Duke, John Shire taking over, Coach K stepping down after last year. They had a terrific recruiting class, added Derek Lively, shout out another Philly guy, Derek Whitehead, Kyle Filipowski, which is the 2 and 4 recruits in this class. So impressive stuff there. Jeremy Roach coming back. I think he's going to be very much like the glue guy of this team and helping everything string together amongst a pretty youthful team overall. So it's going to be interesting to see. I still think like as much as it is a new era, it's still Duke basketball. They still have some notable names and that they're going to find a way to string it together. There might be some growing pains at the beginning, but I think this is a team that's going to figure it out and that there is the top end talent to turn out some NBA prospects and build a strong team together.
Yeah, I'll touch on Duke in a little bit. So I was kind of surprised myself, but I didn't include them in my top three. I'll get into that in a little bit. But my second team was your third place team. I have Miami slotted in there. Last year, Elite Eight run. This is a new look Miami squad, though, this year. And reading up on some of their stuff, talking from Jim Larinaga, they've had the talent there throughout his run, his tenure there at Miami, but they've dealt with health issues a lot. Last year, their guys were able to stay healthy, and you saw what they were able to do with him coaching them up. They had that great run to the Elite Eight in the tournament. But they do lose Cameron McGusty and Charlie Moore, who were two of the better players on last year's team. And in the ACC alone, their scoring definitely is going to be missed. But Isaiah Wong returns, like you said, and then you pair him with Nigel Pack, one of the top transfers out of Kansas State. That's a veteran duo that's played a lot of college basketball. Should be one of the more explosive backcourts, not just in the ACC, but the whole country. So another guy, watch out for Wooga Poplar. He's from Philly, and he only started playing organized basketball in, I believe, his sophomore year. So he's kind of still scratching the surface of the game and just really learning like the proper way to play. But he's a real good athlete with a real nice looking outside shot. I think he could explode and be one of those breakout players in the ACC this year. I'm worried about them a little bit though in the front court and on the glass, having to defend um, bigger guys in the ACC, like some of those guys like Armando Bacot, Derek Lively, Philip Kowski. That's going to be tough. I think that's going to be the biggest thing for them. But Larinaga is such a good coach that I think he's going to be able to get the most out of his personnel. But having to defend Nigel Pack and Isaiah Wong for 40 minutes, because I think one of those guys will always be on the floor for them, barring injury for the whole game. And either of those guys can go off for 30 a night. That's going to be very tough on teams. And like I said a few times throughout this, with Larinaga running the show, they should be in for a big year again. Wouldn't be surprised to see them back in the Sweet 16 range. So really high on Miami coming into this year, despite losing some key pieces.
Yeah, me as well. I think Miami's gonna be fun to watch. And to jump to my number one team, I have UNC here. I don't think that's too much of a hot take. It's very early to be determining this. I need to see some on court, but they're up there with my early favorites to win the title this year. I'm very impressed with the team they have. Hubert Davis going to his second year as head coach, returning a ton of talent in Caleb Love, Armando Bacot, Puff Johnson, Leaky Black, RJ Davis. I think Puff Johnson's going to take a notable leap forward this year. Obviously, Brady Manick moved on. I think he's going to start to fill kind of that type of role for them and step into that. Puff just looked really young last year. We know Cam Johnson's doing his thing with the Suns. I think part of it is he's just kind of a young looking guy. Like he looks very, just needs to grow. But I think another year of him maturing, becoming that, and that he can become like a focal point of that offense. So I'm very excited with UNC. It was an interesting season last year. They started pretty cold and kind of flipped the switch mid-year. They're probably even going to the national championship and all the damage they did in the tournament. I think the highlight still beating Duke twice, shutting out Coach K in his last game at Duke and in the tournament as well. So pretty strong season for them, and I think they're going to build on it even further.
Yeah, UNC is my number one team as well, and just the main thing with them, that the way they flipped the switch, like you said, Sean, was insane last year. I forget if it was late January or early February, but they went to Pitt and lost, and everyone killed them. Like said they were done, no shot at making the tournament, and then just like that, flipped the switch and went all the way to the national title game. People were calling for the North Carolina fans were calling for Hubert Davis to get fired like after that game. That's how bad things were going in Carolina, and it was amazing to see what they wound up doing. Brady Manick, though, was really key in that run. He stepped up and hit big shot after big shot, replacing his production, especially the outside shooting. That's my biggest question mark with this team. Look for Pete Nance, the Northwestern transfer, a really veteran presence. Like he has played a lot of games in the Big Ten. Obviously, Northwestern not that great, but still a lot of big basketball games. It's not like he's transferring from Conference USA up or something. He's played at this high level before. Look for him to have like a kind of a similar impact that Manick did as a transfer from Oklahoma. Other than that, though, all their major pieces return. Caleb Love and Bacot, I think, will both contend for Player of the Year in the conference, maybe even the country. RJ Davis, Leaky back. Puff Johnson, they're all back as well. Like you were touching on, this is just a really experienced roster. The key for them, I think, though, going to be starting out strong, so they aren't playing catch up like they were last year. And they have all the weight in the world on their shoulders, all the expectations kind of coming into this year. With last year, I think it was more of a question mark. A little bit worried about the front court depth behind Bacot if he suffers an injury, like we saw him in the tournament, suffer that ankle injury, and kind of behind him they didn't have much. I know they brought in a couple front court pieces that are freshmen, but those are unproven guys. So this team should be a 1 seed though come March and be competing for the national title yet again.
Yeah, 100%. I think UNC is going to be very well in the national championship conversation this year, and early favorites of mine. I'm interested to see the deeper we get into this and looking around the entire college basketball sphere, but I'm very impressed with UNC's got, and it's cool to see this kind of grouping continue to grow together.
Yeah, it should be another fun year between them, Duke, all those high level teams in the ACC. We'll continue on. How about after our top three? What's a sleeper team that you're looking at for this year that you think could make the tournament that might be flying a little bit under the radar right now?
Yeah, my sleeper team, I'm going to give it to Florida State. Coming off a pretty disappointing year, they went 17-14 last year, only returning 5 players, which I think is probably for the better based on how the year went. But bringing back Caleb Mills, averaged 12.7 points per game last year. He's going to be a major key for them. Added Jalen Gainey from Brown. He unfortunately is out for the year with an ACL. He was expected to play a pretty major role. But my biggest reason for optimism for this team is the addition of Baba Miller, who's a freshman coming from Real Madrid in Spain, guy who's 6'11" and still growing. I'm not gonna act like I've watched a ton of him play, but just off like the highlights, he looks like he's got a little shake, got some ball handling, and he just fits that like Florida State identity of having lengthy guys, having athletic guys that are switchable, can wreak havoc on the team. This feels to me like a team that's going to buy in, build together. Had a couple other transfers too. Think about just 5 guys and a whole new team. I like they all seem to fit the Florida State identity, and I think this is a team that could open some eyes.
Yeah, you can never go wrong with taking Leonard Hamilton and Florida State as a kind of under the radar team because athletically, size wise, length wise, they're usually at the top of the conference. It kind of just comes down to how efficient they are when it comes to shooting the ball and just performing on offense because they're always going to be good on defense and they're always going to have some upsets just because you can't it's one of those things you can't simulate their style of play in practice just how long they are getting in those passing lanes, blocking shots. So always watch out for Florida State. My sleeper team, I'm going to go with Syracuse. The magazine that I always get every year, Lindy's, they have Syracuse projected to finish 12th out of 15. I think this is a tournament team that goes around in the range of the 7 to 10 seed. I think this team gets back to the tournament after a down year last year. Joe Girard is back, one of the better shooters in college basketball, shot a little bit above 40% last year. Jesse Edwards is a really good athletic big man as well. Should be one of the top bigs in the ACC. Averaged 12 a game and 6.5 rebounds per game last year. And then they have 2 young guards that I like and that I've been hearing some really good stuff about. One is Quadir Copeland, a 6'6" guard. He's from Gettysburg, I believe, but then he transferred to Life Center Academy in New Jersey. He went to 6 different high schools if that's even possible anymore. But he's a real flashy playmaker, and at 6'6", his length and athleticism in that Syracuse 2-3 zone, I think he's going to be a great fit there. And then Judah Mintz as well from Oak Hill Academy. Jim Boeheim the other day compared him to a bigger Johnny Flynn. Not sure if you remember Johnny Flynn, but he was a real nice Syracuse guard back in the day. Bringing in those 2 guys to go with Girard, that's going to be some tough matchups because they're all different players. I think this roster has upside. They should put up a lot of points. And I don't think you ever can rule out Jim Boeheim. He's too good of a coach. So need to clean up their zone defense, though. That's been their calling card under him, and they were 14th in the conference last year, allowing 75 points per game. So need to clean that up, close out on shooters better. But I think the athleticism in Copeland and Mintz, as I was touching on, should be a major difference in the zone and be a big X factor for this team this year. So really like Syracuse to make the tournament.
Yeah, and shout out Johnny Flynn for being drafted right before Steph Curry. So I think that's going to be the calling card of his career. But I like Syracuse a little bit as well. It's going to be interesting to me. They moved on from both the Boeheim brothers. And shout out Buddy. I think he's sticking around. He's with the Detroit Pistons organization. I believe he got a 2-way. So shout out him.
Nice.
He's got the guys rooting for success there. But yeah, I like Syracuse as well. I think they're better than kind of what you said. I don't think they're a 12th ranked team, but I think they're a notch below the teams that I've talked about so far. But it'll be interesting to watch what they're like in the life post the Boeheim era, even though the coach is still there.
Yeah. How about an overrated team, a team that you think might underperform some of these preseason expectations?
Yeah, my overrated team is a team that you talked about liking, and that's Virginia. You talked about kind of the continuity of the team returning. I don't necessarily think that's a terrific thing with this team. There aren't really that key additions that they're bringing. They're running back the same squad, and the biggest concern for me is Virginia is always the calling card of, or defense is always the calling card of a Virginia program. They ranked 36th in defensive efficiency 2 years ago and 59th last year, and that's just not typically the case with a Tony Bennett led team. That has to improve, and without getting new pieces, I'm not that optimistic that it's going to be the case. They returned 87.8% of their starting minutes, or of their minutes on the court last year, which is a ton. That's pretty high ranking amongst D1 programs. So I don't know. I think they're going to be okay, but I don't think they're like remotely in like the contending conversation. I just don't see the ceiling of the team being that high.
Yeah, I like the main thing with me was the experience and the returning guys. But when you look at when they did win the national title, that team had I believe, three NBA players on it with DeAndre Hunter, Ty Jerome, and Kyle Guy. I might even be leaving one out. And this roster, I don't think has an NBA guy on it. So
Yeah.
that's something to watch. But I think another big thing with Virginia is they're kind of like Villanova, where they'll have a guy who's like a 100, like number 150 recruit, but he finds his way into a really good role and really good development, and then he eventually becomes an NBA player. So I think there might be a few guys on that Virginia roster that do come out of kind of nowhere and maybe take the program to back to that next level.
Hmm.
When I'm thinking about an overrated team, I'm going to go with Duke. Pretty surprised to have them on here. They're projected to finish second in the Lindy's magazine. Don't get me wrong. I still think that they're going to have a good season. I'm not saying they're going to bottom out or anything, but a team that's, I mean, UNC is pretty much the consensus, and then Duke, it seems like, is the number two behind them. I think they'll finish in that 4, 5, maybe even 6 range, which still should get them in the tournament. They should get, a 5 or a 6 seed. I just don't think they have enough experience. Super talented roster, 5 of the top 7 players in the class of 2022, which is nuts. But the most experienced player is Jeremy Roach, and he's most likely going to be your fourth or fifth option on this team. John Shire, first year head coach. You don't really know what you're going to be getting from that. He can sit next to Coach K all he wants, but you move up to that big boy seat, and you got to make the decisions yourself. We've never seen that from him at any level. He's never been a head coach, so he's had the few times where he was the head coach, but while Coach K was sick or injured or whatever it was. But it could take some time to get this thing fully rolling. I just don't expect them to take off like right where Coach K had them. So like I said, I think they're still gonna have a nice season. Too talented not to be like a 5 or 6 seed in the NCAA tournament, but not one of like those top 2 or 3 seeds like we usually say.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It's going to be an interesting just year for Duke to see kind of the passing of the baton, see what this team looks like with a new identity. I think there will be some growing pains out of the gate, but just the amount of talent on that roster, especially this recruiting class, is what made me personally believe.
All right. To wrap up the ACC, let's go over your all conference picks. So your 5 first team all guys, and including your player of the year. Mention him as well.
Gotcha. So my first one, and I did see we are the same on this, but I thought about being different for the sake of being different, but I just couldn't get past taking Armando Bacot as my player of the year. I think he's just too dominant physically. He's like a consistent 20 rebound guy last year, which is just ridiculous to see. So I have him at center. Caleb Love, I also think gets all conference recognition. Terkavian Smith from NC State, I want to throw in there. He's a guy I liked through the pre-draft process a bunch last year. He decided to withdraw his name. He was kind of a cusp first round pick. I was a little bit surprised to see him pull out, but I think he's going to have a very good year with NC State and make a real impact. I also have Jaden Gardner from Virginia. I think he's going to he's kind of like a college style player that I think is just going to fill it up for them and be kind of that guy. And lastly, I got Isaiah Wong. I think he's in for a terrific year and just put himself fully on the national map this year.
All right, my top 5 players, my all conference team. I have Caleb Love as well. Averaged 15.9 points per game last year, and he was kind of the driving force in the backcourt to that UNC run we saw. One of the more dynamic guards in all college basketball. I got Isaiah Wong on there as well. 15.3 points per game last year. He returned as the lead dog in that backcourt for Miami as a senior, I believe, this year now. I think he should be in for a big year. I threw Kihei Clark in there. I'm expecting another big year from him. Does it all. The best pure point guard in the conference for my book. Great leader, just floor general, also on defense, 4.4 assists per game. Gets a lot of steals as well. He's just one of those guys where I think the voters and like the coaches, whoever ultimately decides on this team, just sees his impact. But I think that's going to have to translate to Virginia winning a lot of games this year to get him on there. Kind of a wild card here. I'm going to go with freshman forward Kyle Filipkowski from Duke. 6'11", modern, stretch big, can shoot, rebound, run the floor. I think he's going to be the most productive Duke freshman this year. I don't think he'll be a top 5 or top 10 draft pick necessarily, but I think he's a good fit for the college game. And then my center, as well as my player of the year in the conference, that's going to be Armando Bacot. Not much to say, just consistent double-double threat. Led the conference last year in points and rebounds, just too big inside. It's just a mismatch nightmare. So Caleb Love, Isaiah Wong, Kihei Clark, Filipowski, and Armando Bacot winning the Player of the Year.
Yeah.
Any last second comments on the ACC before we switch over to the Big East?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a good competitive year of basketball. And just kind of, we talked about this right before we started recording, but something I just think is interesting that's changed like in the college basketball landscape is just how important like transfers are. And the transfer portal has become such a big thing. Like as we were kind of doing our prep, like I'm looking through and I feel like I'm doing like NBA stuff, looking at like free agent signings and additions. And it's just kind of different and something that I don't think is going away anytime soon, but something to just keep in mind and adjust to.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy in terms of the one and dones, the transfers. There's not much continuity with these teams, and a bunch of conferences. When we get into the Big East now, but a lot of these guys are transferring within the conference. So like you're literally going from a team that you might have considered your rival to a new team. So we'll run through the same kind of format that we just did for ACC with the Big East. So who's your number 3 team coming into the year for the Big East?
My number 3 team. So I'm gonna change it up a little bit. So my overrated team, I have as my number 3 team, but I felt lame talking about them twice, so I'm gonna bump it to make my number 4 team is Seton Hall here. Seton Hall coming off a 21-11 year, a bunch of turnover. They got Shaheem Holloway, the coach of St. Peter's, who obviously went on the miracle run in the tournament last year, were a blast to watch. They brought in a ton of talent. Casey Ndefo followed him from St. Peter's, who's going to be a defensive kind of centerpiece for them. Brought in a bunch off the transfer market. I just believe in I like him as a coach. I believe in the defensive identity they're building. I think this is going to be the type of team that no one likes to play against just because they're going to muck it up, make it difficult. And I think that's going to translate to wins. So I do believe in, I'm buying what he's selling as a coach. I think he's brought in enough notable guys that also believe. And I got Seton Hall coming in 4th in the conference.
Yeah, Seton Hall is I think is going to be a real tough team to play against. I'm not sure talent wise if they're ready up there and kind of ushering this new era post Kevin Willard, bringing back Shaheem Holloway. It's going to be an interesting team to monitor. My 3rd place team, I'm going with the UConn Huskies. One of the best big men in the country with Adama Sanogo. This is a really good year for like big men in college basketball. I feel it's like a dying breed kind of, but you look at Sonogo. We'll talk about Creighton Center in a little bit. Um, Drew Timmy's back, Oscar Tshiebwe, Armando Bacot. There's a lot of really good big men in the country this year. But Sonogo is the driving force for this team, and he's going to give fits to opposing teams all year. Averaged 14.8 points per game last year, 8.8 rebounds, which led the conference. They did graduate 4 of their top 5 scorers, though, with RJ Cole gone, Tyrese Martin, Isaiah Whaley, Tyler Polley. That's a lot of key contributors out the door, but I like what they have coming back and some of the new pieces as well. I think Jordan Hawkins in his sophomore year takes a big leap, becomes one of the better guards in the Big East. And Andre Jackson, I think on the wing, a really athletic guy who can shoot the ball as well a little bit. I think he has a really nice year and potentially contends for the Big East Defensive Player of the Year. I think his length and athleticism is going to be a real difference maker. But this team just defends, they're tough, they rebound. They're just going to be a tough battle each and every night. They're built for the Big East. I think they have a nice year, finished 3rd in the conference.
Yeah, it's gonna be a competitive Big East for sure. To move on to my number 2 team, I have Providence sliding in here. Another team with a ton of turnover, and I think it's gonna be a very fun team to watch this year. The 2 most notable guys that they brought in are Clifton Moore and Bryce Hopkins. Clifton Moore, 6'11", averaged 12.9 points, 6.1 rebounds, and 2.8 blocks per game last year at LaSalle. And then Bryce Hopkins was a top 40 recruit last year, went to Kentucky, never found his way really on the court that much. That kind of happens at those type of big time schools like Kentucky, like Duke, where guys who have the talent, but just there's so much ahead of them that it's hard. So I think with more opportunity at Providence, he's going to have a real chance to flourish. And then the guy that really sells me on Providence is still Jared Bynum. I just love Jared Bynum, little 5'10" guy. Last year he averaged 12.2 points per game and was top 50 in assist rate across the entire D1 conference, which I love. I was always watching late night when he would play, and I don't know if it was just a crazy announcer, if this is his actual nickname, but they would always call him the closer and literally put him like side by side with Mariano Rivera on the screen. So that really got me to buy in. I think having more size around him and having him run the show is going to be a recipe for success for Providence, and I'm excited. I'm bought in for them this year.
Yeah, they were exciting team to watch last year, and they just found ways to keep racking up wins. They won so many close games. Love Ed Cooley. I think he's one of the best coaches in college basketball. My 2nd place team, I'm going to go with The team that a lot of people, I think you could say 75% of college basketball, analysts are picking as their number one team. I'm going to have them at number two. That's Creighton. I haven't seen a Greg McDermott team, be fully dominant and reach that kind of upper echelon as like a Final Four team. And I think coming into the year, that's the expectations around this group. So I'm not going to anoint them quite yet until I see it. I do love what they return though, and I think by mid-season, once they start translating some of these transfers in and some of these younger guys continue to get more experience, I think they could get cooking. They added one of the better players in the portal, arguably the best player in the portal, coming from South Dakota State with Baylor Shireman. He will be a great asset for them, one of the best shooters, and he can really pass the ball too. Ryan Nemhard was very impressive last year at the point guard spot. He was the Big East Freshman of the Year, I believe, and then he broke his wrist down the stretch. That really hurt Creighton down the stretch. Ryan Kalkbrenner is also a monster down low, another dominant big in college basketball. He was the defensive player of the year in the conference last year. He's going to, I think, be in contention to battle Sonogo for the overall player of the year. And I also think they have the best home court advantage in the conference. Out in Omaha, Nebraska, there's nothing else to do out there. So they find ways to just kind of fill the stadium up, and it's always an electric crowd, and it's a really big building. They fit like I think close to 20,000 people in there. So having the best home court advantage in the conference definitely leads to some more additional victories. So expect another year of pretty offensive sets, some good motion, and a lot of 3-pointers from Creighton. I think a real good year for the programs coming in.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's a ton of optimism there. I've kind of been hinting at it, but that's my overrated team that I'll touch on when we get there for a lot of the reasons you brought up. But to move on to my number one team, I have Villanova this year, coming off a 30-8 season, 16-4 in the Big East. Another team where it's like an era of change. It feels like there's a lot of that in college basketball this year. But the last year was Jay Wright's last year. No Colin Gillespie, no Jermaine Samuels. So there's going to be a moving on period. Justin Moore coming back from Achilles. It was a bummer seeing that happen in the tournament last year. The biggest reason for optimism for me is seeing Cam Whitmore coming in, the 19th ranked recruit. Mark Armstrong, I also expect to make an impact. But Whitmore is a guy who I think is going to end up a top 10 NBA pick after this year. He's like a different kind of just flavor of player that the Villanova typically brings in, the way that he can jump off the page athletically. He kind of reminds me of Sadiq Bey a little bit in the way that he's kind of cut and play, but I think he's just even more eye-popping athletically, the things he can do. And I still kind of similar to how I felt about Duke, that like Duke is still Duke. I think Villanova is still going to be Villanova, that they're still going to stick pretty similar to their system. They're going to find a way, a guy who's familiar with the Villanova system. And I think this team is going to still lean on the veteran leadership and find a way to win.
Yeah, as a Villanova fan and kind of following them year round, I was surprised. I literally have no talking points on my sheet about Villanova. Like, I don't have them as my sleeper team, as my top team, as my overrated team. I have none of their guys on the first team all conference. I just think it's a big unknown. So much of their success, I believe, was tied to Jay Wright. Kyle Neptune, I believe, was in the program for 10 years, though. So he has, he knows the culture, the kind of system that they have in place. I just think it's a big question mark. I think they're going to have a nice year, but too much unpredictability, I believe, at the moment to kind of hitch my wagon to them. But I guess you could call me a hypocrite because I think this first place team I have has a lot of unknown as well, but I think they have a ton of upside. I'm going with Xavier. They're my team to win the Big East this year. I think Sean Miller, now that Jay Wright's gone, coming back to Xavier after the whole fiasco at Arizona, I think he's the best coach in the conference. He dominated Arizona year in, year out. Never really had the ultimate tournament success, never got to a Final Four, I believe. But I think he's built for the Big East, and he just has that kind of toughness mindset, and he's going to be able to get Xavier back cooking into a perennial top 10 team. He did some nice work in the portal, added Soli Boom, I believe is how you pronounce his name, from UTEP. He averaged 19 a game last year. Should be one of the top guards in the Big East. It will be interesting to see how he kind of adjusts from that level up, going from Conference USA to the Big East, but still a guy who can put the ball in the basket. And I think I saw earlier he averaged like 4.5 rebounds per game as well. So a good rebounding guard. Zach Fremantle in the front court is a really good player, had 17 double-doubles last season. And Jack Nungy is another good piece in the front court. That gives me reason to believe, which I talked about with Creighton and UConn having probably the two best bigs in the conference. They have a few different bodies that they can throw at those guys up front. And I think that gives them a real big edge because their guys aren't going to be worn out, and they're going to be able to rotate bodies in there against some of those bigs. So Adam Kunkel, also a very good shooter. This team last year, people forget, was 11-1. They looked like a lock for the tournament, and they just completely fell apart, leading to the firing of their head coach, bringing in Sean Miller. I think it's a new era, but still, this is a lot of talent, a real good coach coming in. They do need to shoot the basketball better, though. Shot only 32% from three. That has to improve, but I'm all in on Xavier, and I think they're going to be the best team in the Big East this year.
Yeah, I don't think that's like far. Like I can buy into that too. I think the Big East is going to be one of the conferences where it's the most like up in the air, which I think is cool. A lot of these teams like good, like even looking beyond it, like the St. John's and a notch below. It's going to be a competitive conference, so it's going to be fun to watch how it shakes out. Xavier is definitely building something, so it's gonna be cool to watch.
Now translating over to our sleeper team for the Big East. Who do you got for this guy?
My sleeper team, I have St. John's coming in this year. Coming off a 17-15 year where they were just 8-11 in the Big East. Added Andre Curbelo in the transfer portal, obviously from Illinois. I love his game. I think he's got a super mature feel for the game. I think he's going to play a key part in just running that offense, make sure things go smoothly. He'll join Posh Alexander in the backcourt, which I think will be a pretty good duo. They lost Julian Champagnie to the NBA last year. He's on the Sixers with a two-way right now. I think I wish Champagnie stayed another year because I think I would invest for both him and St. John's. But I just like this team as a whole, the way it's coming together. I bought into like Curbelo as a guy that can captain a team and be that number one guy. I think even when you look at all the talent that there was on Illinois, the Eye of the Zumnas, the Coffee Cockburns, everything that comes with it. Curbelo was always kind of the guy that like operated and did the little things. So I'm bought in. I think it's going to be a team that impresses, exceeds expectations. I don't necessarily know if they're even quite on like that. I think they're going to be a borderline tournament team, but I think that's still like exceeding the expectations that are set for him right now.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. St. John's is my sleeper team as well. I think if all goes well, that they could be a team that takes off this year under Mike Anderson. I really like him as a coach. I believe he's coached over 20 years in Division One. He's never finished below 500. So you're going to be at least getting an average team, and I think this is year 4 for him. In Queens, I think it's the year that they kind of make that leap and take off. I think they're going to be around that, like I was saying with Syracuse, my sleeper team, the ACC, flirt in between 7 and 10 range. I think they make it in. They don't really have to sweat it out on Selection Sunday, whether they make it or not. Posh Alexander, awesome, super fun player to watch. Gets up in your grill, just a New York street ball guy. And then you pair him with Curbelo. I think that could be the best backcourt in the Big East. Curbelo is terrible, like one of the worst probably guard defenders in all of college basketball. But then you have Posh to kind of minimize some of that. So, but offensively, they should have some fireworks and be really exciting to watch, especially the way that they play up and down the court. They were the highest scoring team in the Big East last year, and I think their style of play wears teams down. David Jones, a intra-conference transfer from DePaul, as I was kind of touching about earlier. Some of these guys have been just transferring within the conference. He's going to be a nice front court piece for them and give them some good toughness as well. I think he fits that kind of St. John's mold. And then, just guards win in college basketball at the end of the day. And if Alexander and Curbelo find a way to kind of mesh and click, they could definitely be a special team. Watch out as well I've been hearing some good things about this guy, 6'5" freshman guard, AJ Starr. He could be a nice impact player, gives them kind of a bigger guard in the backcourt with Alexander and Curbelo kind of being smaller guys. He could be a nice rebounder and defender for a team in his freshman year, I think. So really liking St. John's, and I'm glad to hear you like him too.
Yeah, I think they're gonna be a fun team to watch before, and I've kind of teased it throughout. But my overrated team is I have Creighton here. Kind of for a lot of the reasons you said. I'm just not bought into them as like legitimate title threats in the way that it's being perceived by everyone. And there's plenty of reason to buy in. You talked about all the guys coming back. Baylor Scheinman, I think is the real deal. I think he's gonna play a valuable role in the team. Defensively, I think they're gonna be pretty good. This like top to bottom the roster. I was trying to find like more holes to poke in it and like reasons why I don't really believe in it, but I think it just is like Creighton. I just don't think is like that quite team like ever, and I don't think I'm bought in for it this year. It just feels like they're gonna hit a point where their ceiling's not as high as the rest of these true contenders, and I think they're not gonna be in quite that mix.
Yeah, the big thing with Creighton is struggle to defend year in and year out, and that's because they kind of get a bunch of guys who are good shooters, not very good athletes. Playing in the Big East, you don't really always need the best athletes, but still, that I think that's one of the things that kind of comes back to haunt them at the end of the day. And if they have a demise, a downfall this year, I think it would be because of just lacking high level athletes on that roster. My overrated team, I'm actually going with Providence here. Kind of in the same light that I was talking about with Duke, where listen, I don't think that they're going to be a bad team any stretch of the imagination. I don't think that they're going to miss a tournament. I'm a huge fan of Ed Cooley, but all like the metrics and stuff, like and watching their games last year, they caught breaks. They had a bunch of chances against games with teams that who had guys out with COVID, some injuries, and they always found a way to like get them like right at the right time. There was like one metric, like a betting metric or something, that literally they were the luckiest team in the country last year. I don't know how you calculate that, but it was all over the podcast and all over last season. So talent wise, I don't think that they're up there as a top 6 team in the league. A lot of these other teams I think are more talented, but they play hard, play together, and when you have a great coach, you tend to have a good season. They were a 4, I believe, last year, a 4-13 where they played South Dakota State. I think this year they're going to be more down around that 7, 8, 9 kind of range. Ed Cooley always does great work in the portal, though, and added Devin Carter, a nice guard from South Carolina. Corey Floyd, a former top 100 guy, redshirted, I believe, last year at UConn. He comes over. He should be in the mix to play right away. And then Clifton Moore played against him in high school. No big deal. Shout out to him. Transfer from LaSalle. Those are all some nice pieces. And they have a former LaSalle transfer in Ed Crosswell there as well. He does a lot of his work in the portal, and it's kind of a mystery to whether or not all these guys mesh or not. That's one of the reasons why I kind of like Virginia to have some better success and North Carolina as well to have another good year because of that continued continuity within each other. You're throwing a bunch of new guys in the lineup. You got to see how that works. So I think a lot of people are having them finish top 4 in the league. I think they're going to be more around the 6 or 7 and kind of maybe fighting for a tournament spot this year. But I think they should still make it. But I think they're a little overrated at the moment.
Don't sleep on Jared Bynum, man. I'm telling you.
Yeah, he was a very exciting player last year, one of the better shooters. Before we wrap up our Big East talk, let's go through our all conference and our player of the year.
Perfect. So my all-conference team, starting out with that center, I have Ryan Kalkbrenner from Creighton, just a defensive monster, kind of the anchor of that team, and I like him a lot. Very kind of strange looking the way he plays sometimes, but it's effective, and all his metrics look very good. I think he's impressive and in for another great year. Cam Whitmore from Villanova, I got kind of what I said. I'm very high on this guy on I think how he's going to look, the impact he's going to make from Villanova and all throughout. So I think he's going to earn the honors with his play. Next up, Adama Sango from UConn, 6'9", 91st percentile in defensive metrics last year, averaged 14.8 points, 8.8 rebounds. I think he'd take another step forward and going to be a valuable part of that team. And you alluded to this guy with St. John's, David Jones, a terrific transfer out of DePaul, a guy that I think fits what they do too. Scored 25.5% or 25% of his points in transition this year. I think they're going to play an even more increased pace at St. John's. He has a chance to get that up even further. 6'6", a good just piece there, and I think he's going to fit and be a key part of their success. And lastly, Baylor Shireman. I think that guy's the real deal. I think he's going to play a valuable part in everything that is done at Creighton. Shot 46.9% from 3 last year, which is just insane. And I think he's going to fit exactly what they're doing. Average 16.2 points per game. Might take a slight step back from that just based on all the talent around, but he's going to be a high impact player and I think receive recognition for it.
Yeah, I think if he turns in a good year at Creighton, I think he's a guy who's going to find his way into the draft next year and be a valuable, NBA piece going forward. Because if you're able to shoot that well, and like I said earlier, he's a really good passer as well. He's not just a one-trick pony. I think he's a guy who finds his way into the league. This was a really hard list. Like there was about 10 to 12 guys I was considering for this one. Whitmore was one of the guys I was considering. I don't have him on the list. I did 2 honorable mentions. He was one of them just because he's battling a thumb injury right now, just had surgery. So I'm not sure when he'll be back and kind of what he'll look like after that. And if he is forced to miss a little bit of time, how does he fit into the rotation when he gets back? I'm a little bit concerned there. And then another honorable mention, Chuck Harris, guard from Butler, like a short little guy, but real fun, real feisty player to watch. Watch out for him this year. But my player of the year, I'm going to go with Sonogo, UConn center. Don't really need to talk much more about him. Just one of the better big men in all of college basketball. I also threw Ryan Kalkbrenner in there as a forward/center, whatever you want to call him. Defensive player of the year last year. I think he competes with Sonogo for the title of the best big in the conference and arguably the best player in the conference. Seton Hall guard Kadari Richmond, having had the chance to play against Seton Hall last year and see those guys up close, he's a really fun and creative player. Like a kind of like I was talking about with Quadir Copeland earlier about Syracuse. He's like that 6'5", 6'6" mode, big guard who can defend, is athletic, and can really pass the ball. I think he's going to be the driving force this year for Seton Hall. I think he has a really nice year. Reigning freshman of the year in the conference, Ryan Nembhard from Creighton, Andrew Nembhard from Gonzaga. I think he's with the Nuggets maybe now, or the Warriors, one of the Western Conference teams, I believe. I think he has a nice year, bounces back from that wrist injury, and is one of the better point guards. And then my other guard on this list, I have Posh Alexander. Talked about him earlier. I think his defensive ability and his just ability to lead this team in that up and down transition kind of pace is going to make for a nice year for him. He might be a player of the year too. So I don't think there's a clear cut player of the year in this conference. There's a 5 guys I think that you could pick from, but I think Alexander will be the best guard in the conference this year.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun to watch. Like you said, a ton of talent coming out of this. So I think we're in for a good year of college basketball, and we'll obviously get into it deeper as we go through the rest of the conferences. But I'm excited with just looking at these two and everything that's about to happen.
Yeah, there's a bunch of good games earlier in the season too. They have that like PK 85 tournament out in Oregon. There's like 30 teams or something in that. So Maui Invitational, I got a bunch of good stuff coming up. Any last second comments before we head out though?
Yeah, no, I'm good to go. Yeah, excited to keep going with it. I'm trusting the Providence Friars. I think I'm hitching to that wagon, and that's all I got.
All right. We will be back next week with our Big 10, Big 12 episode. In the meantime, like, subscribe, share, and we will talk next week.